What's up, Rockstars, and welcome to my review of DC's deck building game, the latest expansion on crowdfunding right now, Arkham Asylum. Just as a general disclaimer, this is a prototype. Everything you see can and will change to a degree because if nothing else, there'll be proper cards. These are printouts and stuff like that. Like they've made the game. It plays well. I didn't notice any issues at all, so it seemed fine. But I'm sure they'll keep looking at the balance, and if nothing else, the quality will improve. So yeah, obviously this is not final quality, right? So it's a prototype, but it allows me to get some game time in with it and let you guys know what I think about it. Now, this is part of the DC deck building game. The DC deck building game has been out for a very, very long time. Years and years and years. This is the latest iteration. What does that mean for newcomers? What does that mean if you have bought everything that they have to offer? I'll let you know because I personally own a ton of stuff, but I played with people who had only played one game of this before years ago. So I'll cover it all here shortly. Now, one thing I do want to say before I get into some of the new things about this is that person that hadn't played a whole lot of it, they afterwards said that this was the most fun they've had playing a board game with me. Like, legit, they said they love it more than Zombicide, and they quite enjoyed playing Zombicide with me, because who doesn't enjoy playing Zombicide? So seriously, it is a lot of fun. It is. Spoiler alert there. All right, so let's talk about some of the new stuff, right? Now, there's quite a bit that's the same, right? Obviously, it still follows the same general structure, but there's actually quite a bit in this one. This one in particular, and I'll get into that in a little bit, that's actually fairly new. So one of the things they do is they have bribes. And what bribes do are essentially some of the cards here will have a bribe cost on there. So you'll be gaining victory points from a variety of things, and as you get those, you can spend them if you want on a bribe. A bribe allows you to play the card, bribe them for a bit, but you're not actually gaining the card. Now, one of the cool things about that is you can use that within your combos, both to be able to do what it says on the card, but also, and because it costs, if you have a lot of VP, you could, if everything on the lineup has a bribe, you could just buy them all, right? There's like a lot of options there, but because you still control them, you haven't gained them. If you have to like destroy something, whatever, you can bribe them like, you were on my team, but now I just backstabbed you, right? It's very thematic, it works very well, and it's quite cool and allows you to have some of those costs like destroy something and have it not really affect you too much because it's not even the card that you gained. There's a lot of cool stuff like that at play. That's one of them. Another thing they have are hostages. So hostages are an ongoing effect that allow you to do some things, but a lot of it is gaining a card, gaining VP, something like that, but you have to release them to do that. Releasing a card just means putting it back into the deck that it belongs to on the bottom, essentially. There's only one hostage showing at a time. You don't refill it to the end, but you can get multiple hostages. And some of these hostages, by the way, work in a really interesting way because they are quite thematic. So there's some that allow you to like use a hostage as like to take on an attack, right, to defend against and stuff like that. There's some that allow you to release hostages. When you face Batman, he might force you to release some hostages, right? Like there's all these kind of like thematic ways around the hostages. I thought that was quite cool. They also have henchmen. Henchmen are kind of like a kick. They're a little bit more, and what they allow you to do, for the most part, besides gaining the +2 power that you used to get, is Surge. Surge is another thing where essentially you just add more cards to the lineup. And so you just have more options, and it's a kind of a free, hey, there's now more options available, plus I gain some power on top of that. So you're able to gain power to buy more cards and have more options by playing them. Quite powerful indeed. And there are other things that Surge, is not just the henchmen there. Same with like the hostages, there's hostages, but there's a lot of things that interact with the hostages. Otherwise, you're going through, level 1, level 2, level 3 of heroes. You could do villains if you wanted to. You could, mix and match with all the sets as you typically would. But for the most part, that's that. Now, coming back onto this side of the table, when it comes to your characters, you have your supervillain. They have a unique ability. Now, a lot of their unique abilities actually are a mechanic of some kind. So, for instance, the Riddler has these tokens that you're able to place down here, and then you're drawing cards based off of how many are there. And then when somebody buys that, they actually have to flip it up, and, they got attacked, or, they gained a VP. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good for you and them. Sometimes it's just bad for them. They don't know what it is. You're able to place those on and kind of play these little riddles. These also come with their own card. In this case, riddle me this, right? Or in this one, the cryo suit, right? So you have all of these single cards in your punch and vulnerability deck. So you start out with it. and it feeds directly into the character, normally their powers. So for instance, right, we have Poison Ivy here. This is each time you play an ongoing card, like a hostage, you may put a card with cost 0 from your discard pile into your hand. Well, 0 cost is like her Eco Terrorist, which says +1 power, and if you control a hostage, gain 1 VP. Otherwise, you may gain the top card of the hostage deck. So you can actually just gain a hostage that way. If you don't own one, you can get that from this, and you get that through the ongoing. So there's all these interconnectedness that they have that allows them to play really well. I find this combo of the hero ability plus the card, the seed card into your deck, that really allows them to play differently in a good way. For instance, this cryosuit here, right, says you may freeze a card in the discard pile, right? So you have these frozen cards that can do that. But there's also a freeze gun equipment, because maybe the Riddler picked up the freeze gun and now he's freezing things too. So there's a lot of mechanics at play that are very specific to the character that you're playing, and I thought that was also a lot of fun. Again, very thematic, very cool, and the Joker's doing different things, and then the Mr. Freeze, then the Riddler, then Poison Ivy. So it all just kind of works from a thematic standpoint. So as a DC game, I think this works really well. So as I said, the person who hadn't played a lot loved it, but honestly, we all did. We all had a great time with it. The other 3 of us have played it quite a bit. My wife and I, we've probably played it the most, and we all quite enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun with this one. It played super good. It played very well. There were a few edge case rule things. Again, prototype. So often the rule book of these have specific this card, this is how it is. They didn't have that quite yet for this. I'm sure they will. They have it in every one of their other releases. So if there is any kind of oddity around things or timing or something like that, they'll sort it out there, I'm sure. And we were able to still play just fine without it. It wasn't a big deal at all. So honestly, it was really good. I think part of what made it really good is all of us really like the combo system. And the combo system in Arkham Asylum specifically is complex and very rewarding and a lot of fun. And I'll get to kind of my final statement, which will kind of touch back to this. So for now, I'm just going to touch on the fact that it is a bit more advanced. So if you've only played the base game of DC deck building game, you've played the easiest baby's first DC deck building game there is, right? As you know, a lot of the expansions, I said this in my previous review of kind of here's a whole lot of review for everything they've done before, pretty much. And is that the expansions add a lot of either nuance, some complexity, or some uniqueness, or a combination of the bunch. So sometimes, you're attacking planets and you have defenders, and sometimes you're going against these different crises, and sometimes you're playing versus, right, between two, like Injustice. And so there's all these different modes. There's even the versus modes where it is 2-player, 1 versus 1, right, with almost like a fully pre-seeded deck and stuff like that. So there's all of these kind of ways to enjoy it to various levels. If you are a power gamer or something like that, or if you really want some oomph in your deck building game when it comes to the play, this is a solid choice. It really is. It can get kind of complex. Now that's either a positive or a negative depending on how you normally play this game or how you like your games. I think one of the reasons it becomes so complex is it is kind of like a culmination of things. Like I said, obviously there's 4 stacks here instead of 3, right? So the hostages aren't just like the kicks or the henchmen, right? Which they're doing a unique thing. They're doing a unique thing. You have to release your weaknesses now. But on top of all the normal combo stuff, you also have the bribing. And like I said, that changes things drastically, right? When you have, 4 VP here maybe, right? And I'm looking at this and I have my hand of cards, right? And I'm busy playing. I have to look at this, but then also anything that has a bribe to it too, and that really adds a lot to it. Plus, you have a lot more of the ongoing things with the hostages if you choose to do that. Plus, you might be able to surge and offer new opportunities that you don't know about until you start playing your cards, right? So not only do you have the typical thing that you could do in a lot of the versions of this game where you can, play a card that allows you to look for a card or get something out of your discard that then allows you to play this, which allows you to draw new cards. One of those cards allows you to, buy something from the line for free. And, so you always have that kind of one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. The bribing on top of that and choosing, do I spend literal victory points for this one play? Is that worth it, right? is really, really cool. I very much enjoyed that. I thought that was a lot of fun. I loved it. And everybody was able to play it quite well. There were a few times where my son was playing and he, didn't play the optimal move. Or sometimes where I didn't play the optimal move, where I played it and then afterwards I'm like, I should have done that in a different order, or I should have done this first because then I could have actually gone that and didn't even think about that. Or I would forget to bribe because it's a new mechanic. And I'd be like, oh, I could have bribed that and that would have given me +2 power. And then if I played a villain this turn, I may destroy a card in the discard pile. So then I could have gotten rid of a weakness or, whatever. So there's all this kind of stuff at play, including the unique mechanics, right? So, for Toothface, he's flipping his Two-Face coin that he has, right? So you're doing that, or you're playing Riddler tokens, or you're freezing stuff so it stays out of the discard pile until you renew it, and then it comes in so it's delayed, it's frozen, it's to thaw out, right? Or it's a lot. And I loved it. Everybody I played with loved it, but if you're here for a more casual DC deck building experience, or even just a more casual deck building game, this is probably not the version for you. However, if you are, or if you've built up to it, or if this sounds exciting, just have it as a different mode. Let's play a real chunky one. This is definitely the one to get. Out of all of the many expansions that I've bought, this is definitely the top tier when it comes to that, and very much feels like the culmination of where DC deck building has come from that kind of core box experience way back in the day when it first launched with that first one. Even the core boxes later, like Teen Titans, stuff like that, those have already added to it and given a little bit more oomph. But then these kind of expansions here just really add a lot to it. And to the point where it's the same familiar feeling that you get from DC deck building, but at the same time offers something pretty unique. Honestly, for me, as somebody who owns a lot of the expansions, this is like almost by far the one I would point to as like, this is like the best version that I've played of it. I really enjoyed the combos of it, and that's really what drives me, the combos. I like some of the other things, right? Like getting through different levels of the worlds, right? New Gods I really enjoyed. I've mentioned that a few times, right? So there's a few that like call to me a little bit. This one, very good. Plus, you get to play as the villains. It's just fun, right? You're doing all this cool stuff. You're fighting against Batman and James Gordon and Batwoman and stuff like that. It's just good fun. Now, one of the things I did notice is the lineup can get kind of busy. There's a few versions of the game or a few characters that can really add a lot to the lineup. Granted, this one, though, pretty much consistently does it, and here's why. So you can bribe cards, right? So they kind of go next to the bribe card. And then you can surge, right? So you can have more appear as well, right? Let's say these two were surged first or something like that, right? And then, on top of that, you have the Riddler token. So if you're playing with the Riddler, he might be, doing different lineups for whatever. And so between the Riddler tokens, between the surges, between the bribing, those three things combined can add quite a bit. And so when you do that, it does get a little busy. Now, that's no problem for somebody who's played a lot. But for somebody who maybe hasn't, I could see that being a little bit of an issue. That being said, the person, like I said, who played with us had no problem doing it, but they weren't the one managing the lineup. That was me. I was the one kind of drawing cards and putting them where they need to go and stuff like that. If they weren't, they might get a little confused there. Again, it's nothing like crazy complex. There are way more complex games when it comes to like having it to be a certain way. This one does run really smoothly and pretty intuitively, to be honest. But with the multiple layers, right, it can be a bit much, where there's just a lot of options. Speaking of AP, analysis paralysis, very much possible. In fact, I did notice this. I didn't instill a timer, but there were a few times where a few of these turns from some certain people just took a long time, not just to play out. The combos themselves can take a while to play. Like I said, you can have a card that allows you to draw 2 cards. One of those cards can allow you to bring a card from the deck. So then you're going through your discard and, I need this card here. So you get that card here. And that changes what you're doing. So then you're looking at that. The more cards you are drawing or interacting with, the more permutations and unknown variables are at play. And it just makes your turn last a long time, whether you're thinking about the optimal way to play it, or whether you're just going through the motions. Either way, it can be kind of longer than normal. So a lot of these games run pretty fast. And this one, it did take a little bit longer to get through because of how complex some of these can go. Now, you can always customize it, right? So you have your stack of heroes you're going through, level 1 through 4, and you can, of course, limit those so there's less that you need to do, right? Especially if you get rid of the level 4 or even level 3s. I actually prefer to do it that way if you're trimming them down, just because a lot of times the time isn't necessarily to get there, but it's to ramp up to get that many points. So if you drop the level 4, you just don't need to get that many points to defeat something, right? So the game just ends earlier inherently. So I tend to like it that way, but again, it is very customizable, whether it's mixing it with another bit of your collection or whether it's just customizing how long of the game you want to play. Very helpful for that. Also, of course, different player counts works quite well. I found, especially with this one, a lot of the attacks honestly aren't ones that are super like, oh, this is really big on another card. In fact, a lot of what I found was there was some that like allow you to like have the opponents all flip their top card over. You can use one of the cards, things like that. The more options, the better. So those cards aren't as powerful afterwards. The attacks honestly weren't too bad. So it wasn't, I don't mean like the attacks weren't impactful. I just meant there's some, in some of these series, the attacks really benefit from having every foe being attacked, right? In this one, not so much. Also, it's not super attack heavy when it comes to the actual attack and defend. There are ways to do stuff with other people without attacking in this one, which is kind of a fun villain kind of thing to do. But either way, I think even 2-player, this works really well. But obviously, you can customize it as you see fit with a wide variety of things. Okay, so I'd like to kind of summarize this a little bit, right? You guys know how this plays at this point. Again, this is a quite old game, so I'm not talking about, oh, you have to add power, and then there's the cost. And honestly, that's a fairly basic deck building mechanic. So the moment I say deck building, if you're at all aware of what a deck building game is, that's typically the case. You have to play certain cards and then purchase new cards to build your deck during the game instead of before, right? Having the pre-card here is just a tiny bit of a seed, just enough to where I felt it's not like pre-constructing, but at the same time, it does kind of allow you to lead to a path should you so choose, or at least playing that character can feel a little bit different because you try different things like, oh, I mean, I'm going to play a lot more hostages because it's really important for her, right? Or I'm going to do a lot more stuff where I'm not buying from the lineup and buying these because I want other people to buy the lineup, or whatever it is, right? There's somewhere you're just destroying cards and stuff like that. What I found, this one in particular, this Arkham Asylum version, if you like deck building, typically you like the concept of building up a deck and having these different combos. What this one does, that I think is kind of on the more unique side, is it allows it to also focus on how well you play your turn, not just how well you build your deck. And I think that's an important distinction. A lot of deck building games just kind of inherently go together, right? It's like, oh, this clearly goes together. And so if I build my deck with these cards, that's how that deck is going to play, and that's how I'm going to play it. And so there's not really a lot of focus on your actual play, but on what you choose to get your deck for those combos. This one, because again of the bribing, of the surging, of the inherent interplay between the card abilities themselves, between the hostages, all between the unique mechanics, how you play your turn, your actual turn within that deck building matters just as much. In fact, perhaps more. It's not enough just to build a good deck, you have to play it well too. And that's something I think a lot of deck building games kind of skirt the line of not really needing that, and instead they focus on building up a deck, which I love. Like I even when I played like Magic, I preferred almost to build decks more than play them, right? So I get it, and I really enjoy building the deck. But if you don't play your deck well, and you can play it well or not, it's not just seeing the combos, it's giving these cards, giving these unknowns, giving these, having it even like where to put your token, right? Oh, that one looks like, I know that this one would be something that opponent would want, so I'm going to place it here, right, for that reason. Or I'm going to choose to freeze this stuff here, or I'm going to choose to go this route here. Like, it was a lot more focused on the turn, and not just, it's still there, but not just the deck building portion of it that I really appreciated. So, if you have ever felt that deck building games aren't like strategic enough for you to actually like play and be a better player, this one proves otherwise. Like this one, very much the better player will win. This is very, very focused on like I played my hands well, not just built my deck well. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's kind of maybe splitting hairs for some of you, but if you understand what I'm talking about there, I think you get it. And if you've played deck building games, I think you understand what I'm going for there. Hopefully I worded that well enough for you. But seriously, ton of fun. Had a blast with it. Definitely one of the top expansions to get in my book. There are quite a few. Like I said, there are some that I personally like more than others. There's stuff like Rebirth and other things like that do, again, also play quite different. Even Injustice plays quite different. There's a lot of those there. This has a lot of that with, like I said, the unique mechanics here at play between the bribing and the surging and the hostages and the unique mechanics. Like, there's a lot here. But when it comes to just like the power plays you can do here and the difficulty of putting the combos together, but the satisfaction of them implementing them and doing them, the complexity of them pays off very well and definitely makes this stand out among the many expansions available. So definitely recommend it. Had a blast. Again, this is on crowdfunding right now. I'll link down to it down in the description below, of course, for your convenience. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Of course, I'll share. I did have a real lot of fun with this. And so did everybody else to play. Like I said, they were like, this is like the best game we've played together. Like, this beat Zombicide, which for them was like a huge, like, this is big. So this was really, really big. And they lost too. Like, they didn't even win because, and that's another, like, because they weren't used to the game. And if you haven't played a lot of this, like, you're going to have to kind of learn as you play. You're going to get a few sessions in before you start playing optimally. It's not just about seeing, oh, that card is clearly better. No. It's making the right decisions on what you're doing to come out ahead. Very, very cool. Definitely recommended. This DC deck building games, Arkham Asylum on crowdfunding now. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.